Hello everybody. Thank you for understanding that something can go wrong, and we are back on our live stream. And as said, we will discuss today some opening file and how we can make use of it. So first I want to show you a small position from a world champion, Capablanca, and he was rightly showing us how to make use of the back rank, and he has some nice tactical idea. So when we get there, let me see, where is it? We start from this position, and Capablanca was wide, and he just sacrificed a pawn on c2, and the back rank is weak, as we can see. So the first move we are looking for is he was heading his rook to b8, pinning the queen on the king. So there's actually one way to defend, that's with rook e8, and now white should think about how to make his next move. So I'll give you a little time to see what you will do, and yeah, think about it, how to make use of the back rank rook and the pin which is on the queen and the king. So you might have some thought about it, and actually the most useful or most interesting move you might play is queen a8. And in fact this was the move which is played, but actually it's a big mistake, because there's now a wonderful defense against the threat. Of course white is trying to take on e8 and pinning the queen. Black has a counterattack, and he played rook takes a2. Of course, if the queen takes back on a2, then black can take the rook, and the back rank is fine again. And if we go back and white takes the rook on e8, we go with rook takes a8, and the queen is defended by an X-ray defense, and black is fine again, and probably even can go for a win. So when we go back to this position, queen a8, if you thought this was the correct move, unfortunately no prizes for this move, but we have two more moves which are winning, and I'm very pleased to see if you can do this. And it's the move queen b5, which is actually the most remarkable move, attacking clearly the rook on e8 and forcing black to do something. Of course, black can have some interesting luring idea by playing the rook to c1. Clearly, when we take again, we will play rook takes b8, and black defended himself in a correct way. Of course, white can again say, I'm not into this party, I will play king f2, and in this case, black can try the same trick. He can say, well, I take on b1, if you take on e8, we will take on b8, and queen is defended again, well done. But of course, this is not going the way how it's going to be, because on the move king e2, rook b1, we will play rook takes e8, and the queen is hanging with threatening mate, and the queen on b5 is hanging also. But it can be taken. So we go back. We played king f2, black can take check again, and in this position the king goes to f1. If you go back to c1 again, king e2, and we have the same kind of troubles like before. So in the game you can still try rook takes b8, queen takes b8, threatening again mate. Now there are two moves. If the queen goes to g8, we can simply take it out and go for rook b8, mating the black king. And if we go for king g8, the queen goes to b3, threatening to take the rook and the king at the same time. Nice double attack, and white won the game. So what we notice is that when these open files are there, one of the aims we would like to achieve is to go for this back rank, to see if you can get to the 8th rank or the 7th rank, and to see yeah, how we can win this kind of position. So this was one nice tactical idea. As we see, there are not only tactical ideas, but we can also go for strategic ideas. I mean, just and one of the nice positions which we had is one of the games of Aronian against Karpov. And usually we would expect that Aronian might have some troubles getting positional difficulties against one of the masters of positional play, Karpov. But in this game he did very well. He exchanged some nice pieces, controlled the d-file, and from there he has a strong control over the game. Because if you control the center, it's much more easier to go to the flanks and see if you have opportunities there. In this position we look again for forcing moves. Like in the position before, it was rook b8, queen b5, making concrete threats. And here we see that we have again also some very forcing line. Starting with bishop d6, not very surprising. You will attack the rook will go away. But now suddenly we see that the king on h8 is in a little bit misplaced, and we can attack knight with knight e5, the pawn on f7. King should go back to g8. And now comes the important moment. You always can have this kind of phase in the game where you have a nice position, you did everything well, but suddenly you notice that the game is not progressing by itself. I mean, you improved all your pieces, they are nicely placed. And most of the time we need to look for some tactics or some concrete pawn moves or some exchanges, because if all the pieces are already on good squares, it's very difficult to improve them anymore. Simple as that. And here Aronian find a very nice way to make use of the 8th rank again, and we see how these rooks can come alive. So he plays bishop e7. Very nice move. Threatening bishop takes f6 with ideas with knight g4, and the black king's position is very vulnerable. But of course also rook d8 is coming, pinning the rook, and you might eliminate the defender with bishop takes f6, having some troubles to avoid mate or big material loss. Black played queen c7, bishop f6, as said, we take back. And now comes another interesting moment of the game. Of course the knight is under attack, and usually we want to go away with the knight just to make it safe. But sometimes you can look for more forcing moves, attacking stronger material or keeping your pieces as active as possible, because that's of course the most easy way to attack. So the queen goes to e4, rook to a7, and again the knight goes to g4. We with double threat, knight takes f6 and knight takes 6, and the queen on e4 is also preventing queen f4, which was important, not letting black come into the game again. King g7, and again we see that the rooks are still controlling the d-file, and actually they are also splitting the black pieces. Think about when in the old times when you're at the battlefield and you can lure the opponent's army into two parts. It's very good because then you can isolate them and make use of them. So actually this is a little bit what happens to this d-file when you have positional strength. Keep it there. Don't try maybe to force something very drastically, but just improve your position and try to make use of some of the weaknesses from one side to another, and especially in this mobilization you can you can definitely have a good attacking game. Here we see that the knight is nicely placed. The queen is a little bit doing nothing at the moment because we are attacking on the black squares and the queen is simply on the white square, so we are relocating it to e3. Attacking queen a6, knight f6 mating, so the black is forced to defend with rook h8. And now again we come to another important moment. We have a defender, and of course, as usual, we want to eliminate defenders. Defenders are not the problem. Very often also in my trainings I hear, but there's a defender, or I didn't think further. But very important to remember, a defender is not a problem, but it's something to solve. It's a task which you need to solve. So how are we going to do it? We have the rook still coming in the game because the queen and the knight are nicely working together. So we play rook d8, rook a7, very unfortunate move because the rook is of course not ideally placed on h7. Now white shows that there are more weaknesses in the black position, aiming at f6. Black played f5, but after queen c3 he resigned the game. Wonderful game played by Aronian. And you saw that from the beginning when we go back, because this is also important when you're learning. Try to look at them once more or to repeat them, and so that you can mark them and think clearly about what was exactly the point which we would like to take from the game. First you saw that we were chasing the rook away and lure the king into the game. Then we could make use of the back rank. And after the back rank you saw that we got weaknesses at the king's side, and with the knight and the queen we slowly got into the black squares. Black was had difficulties to find the solution. Great, so we saw the 8th rank and the strength of it. So now we will go a little bit back, because actually not only the 8th rank is very wonderful to go to, but we also have the 7th rank. And to show this, I want to show you one minor position, and it was played in this way. White position is interesting. White sacrificed a pawn, but has active bishop also, especially when you compare the black bishop, white bishop on d5 to e7. The white bishop is of course better. The knight on e3 is nicely placed because it's controlling the white squares, and the rooks are also already in the game, and the black pieces beside the pawn up are already passive. What is important is also that one of the games Kasparov played against Karpov, he was explaining that the knight on f5 was worth or value an extra pawn. So if you want the knight on f5, you can sacrifice a pawn. Well, we see in this case that the knight can go to f5, and we can see the strength. It's clear that white will gain back his pawn, and in this way we'll at least have an equal game, but of course we are aiming for more. Black took the strong bishop on d5, and now there are two ways. Either you can take with rook on d5, which is definitely not bad, but after bishop d8 you should still keep in mind that the bishop can be very strong later on in the game, and in general also keep in mind that the coordination between the bishop and the rook are strong, and which means that also this can give better, maybe defensive chances than what was happening in the game. In the game, white took on e7, check. We exchanged some more pieces, and simply because we exchanged some active pieces of black, the passive ones will remain. Rook to d8, and now there are two options. Either we can go for rook de1, controlling the d-file again like in Aronian style, and making use of the 7th rank, threatening to take on f7, g7, maybe b7, and actually the value of the pawn will not be felt. Which is also comes to another rule which you can apply for your games, that when you have a rook on the 7th rank and you have 3 squares, like in this position we have 3 squares, it means that the rook will have a permanent status, because it can't be chased away by the black king or by any other piece without losing a pawn, and that for such a rook you can sacrifice a pawn. So we can see that in this case it was fully justified to sacrifice it. Black can play rook f8, rook c7, threatening rook e7 and taking on f7. Black might be lucky to sacrifice, to exchange at least the rooks. But after rook d2, king d2, we have another problem. Simply we see the difference between the kings. And that's also one of the reasons which is important. If you have a rook on the 7, don't try to take a pawn and give the 7th rank back, but try to use your king to get into the game, try to get the pawns with your king, so the rook on c7, cut off the king, even keep the rook on a7 passive, and the position is very difficult to hold. Later on white easily won. So this is a nice example that we can see that even on the 7th rank you can also make use of it, and that's a good example. To show you one more example, and again it's a very classic game, is one of the games of Rubinstein. And in this game we go to a little bit higher. Let me see where I can find it. This is sorry, just to wait and see if I can find it. Here it is. So we have a famous position where the pawns looks equally, and actually many players like the pair of bishop. I remember I was watching one of Sweetler's Blitz games, and he said even though he could have a good knight, he still preferred to see 2 bishops on the side and yeah, just play with them. The good thing about 2 bishops is of course clear. We have 2 squares under control, which means you can exchange in any time any pawn you wish. Further on, it's important that yeah, you can control much more squares, also bring pawns much easier to the other side of the board. So in this position we will see that this is not a very important factor in this game. We will just go for rook c1, controlling the open file. Black needs to develop first, doesn't have time to do it in another way. But simply white is first now. So he doubled rooks. And now comes the interesting moment, because we can of course play rook c7, but after rook b8 and rook c8 it's not clear how we will maintain this the rook on the 7th rank. So this is kind of difficult to do so. And that's also one of the reasons why Rubinstein thought about it and came to queen a4. Queen a4 has 2 meanings. First, we want to take away the pair of bishops, and especially after b6 we see that the white squares are very vulnerable. So we can see that those squares again are very vulnerable, so we wish to exchange the bishops so these squares can be used for the rooks to enter the position. We have extra control over the square on c8. That's also one of the important things, and well, that's why queen a4 was a nice move. Black tries to avoid this exchange with a6, makes sense, trying to keep the pair of bishops, but now we see that rook c7 already becomes stronger, because rook b8 is not really possible anymore, rook a b8, because we take with the bishop on a6. So black chose to play b5, but b5 now shows that the pawns are in the wrong square, because the black squares are very vulnerable. And that's always why Capablanca already said that the pawns in general should be additional to your bishop, because then you have more control of the squares and you have a more mobile bishop, because now also the bishop is just looking to his own squares. The queen, we go to a5, very nice, defending the rook on c7, taking all black squares under control and preventing queen b6 just to protect the bishop. So the rook should go to b8, threatening rook c8, and that's why also white played this nice next move. White played rook 1 c5. Very important move, because after rook fc8, in case you think, okay, why not to exchange some rooks, we would just take on b7 and we gain a bishop, because we would take intermediate on b8 with check, and after we can take back the rook on c5. So black needed to play rook d8, but now it's clear the c file is ours. There's no way how black will escape. Now you have another difficulty, because the way how to proceed. We saw that in Iranian game we were using the knight to find an extra weakness, and that's why we need another piece. The bishop on e2 is difficult to get into the game, because it's looking to the black pawn on b5. We could of course play a4 to make tension, which I will explain later is one of the important things also with the open file, and actually so not only open file but also open diagonal. But this still gives some weakness on b2, and it's unnecessary to go for such complications. And he found a nice trick, because he played knight e5, bringing the knight into the game. We have ideas with knight c6 or knight e7, and of course the main question is what we would do on bishop e5. But again, we have the same trick as we saw before. After taking, we can take on b7, and again we have difficulties with the rook on d8 hanging. So black played bishop f6, knight c6. This is one of another tactical idea white had. Two rooks are hanging, and now you have difficult choice, either to give an exchange by not taking, or taking it, but then a6 and b5 become vulnerable, and also the queen might get into trouble. So he played e6, g3, maybe not really necessary, but Rubinstein played everything in a good pace, because yeah, well, I mean, when you have such a good position, you shouldn't throw away your advantage by rushing. You have all the time of the game. Yeah, that's a good thing about having everything under control. Rook dc8, now we will take, and here there were many ways to win. White could easily just play something solid and just enjoy the game, but Rubinstein was maybe a little bit inspired, maybe by some other fireworks on the other games, and he played bishop takes b5. Bishop d8, nice intermediate move, because clearly after taking we would have a pin which is difficult to defend, and white would have gained material. Also important is to see is that after queen a6 we have queen d7 attacking f7 and b7 at the same time, so this double attack also gives troubles. Bishop d8, now comes again another fantasy move, bishop e8, we attack f7, we don't care so much about the exchange, because we simply have a very good position. If you would take, we can just take with queen, queen takes, rook takes, and f7 is under attack. If you don't want to lose another pawn, then you should go into this kind of rook endgame, but it's also not very promising, because the rook is well placed, the pawns are weak, and the white king also can come easily to the queen side. So queen f8. Now we just take on b7, and we take on b8. Very nice queen sacrifice. As said, he was really in the mood. First he took on b5, then he played bishop e8, and again the rooks look wonderful because the black king is in serious trouble. That's always the point when you move your pawns forward, and here he has difficulty to defend all his material, and black resigned. As we see, we have tactical motives on the 8th rank, we had tactical motives on the 7th rank, and now we go to a little bit to some technique, I mean some basics, just to show you the main points in which we should think about when we come to the open file. I mean, we had already some idea now about what's the aim, so it was some kind of idea how we what we are doing it for, and now we go to some basics. So as said, when there's no open file, we always need to look for tension, and this is one of the main points, is that this pawn on f3 and e4, they are the ones you need to look for. So when the pawn would be on f2, you would need to play for f3, or you need to play for c5 or for g4. You need to make tension to open the file. So it's not a very difficult exercise, but it shows in essence very clearly that when you look about open files or how to activate your piece, you need to exchange pawns. You need to make tension and exchange them in a way to activate your pieces. Here you see the rook again has those 3 squares, its permanent status. The black rook probably needs to remain passive. The king comes into the game and gives big problems. You still could try d5 in a way to at least protect your pawn and to get active play. Now again, we shouldn't be too greedy taking on c7, because then the pawn on c4 would be hanging, but we can simply play c5, and again the king come later on very easily. We have ideas with going to e3, f4, e5, and so on, and again we leave the rook on the 7th rank and entering with the king. So important basic position, we need to look for tension, and when we have it, you need to find the moment to exchange them in the correct way. Here again we have another position, again tension. White simply took again, and again we need to remember that there's a little difference with the position before. The rook now only has 2 squares, and as I said before, 3 squares are very important, and that's why white here doesn't play h4 or maybe some king move, but first plays rook d7. We attack the pawn on d5, which needs to be protected, or you should give a pawn. And as I said before, the rook on the 7th rank usually is worth a pawn, so here you can see you can take it, or if black defends it, we can just play h4, and if the king comes, we just go to c7, and both pieces are tied down to the pawns. The white king can march again into the position. We still have a nice passed pawn, and again we see that with the rook on the 7th rank, you have an excellent position. So when we see to the basic element of the positions where we are in which we are looking for, it's very important to conquer this 7th rank, and from there on you need to make use of it and maintain your 7th rank. Now I wanted to show you one practical game, and it's one of the games where let me see where we have this one, and it's here. So as mentioned before, we need to make tension, and that is the way how we should think about positions. White has a very nice protected passed pawn on c6. The rook on a5 is a little bit offside, might be, but on the other hand the black rook is also now tied down to a6. The rook on f8 is passive, and the rook on c1 is in well placed, like Rubinstein said, it's behind the passed pawn, but also not very active. So we see that although the position looks very attractive, we don't have a way to break in the black position and to make some difference. So we need to look for tension. This is always very important. If your activity isn't big enough to win the game, try to look for pawn tension so you can make the difference with other pieces or other options. So which one is correct? We have a4 and we have g4 as options, and it's important to see that a4, although it looks quite nice, we might take again, and we say that the pawn on b4 becomes vulnerable. A little bit like in the example of Rubinstein, where we also could play a4 to open up the position. It's true that we can attack a6, but black still has the option with king b6 and also rook b8, rook b6. He can still defend himself. So I don't think this is the way how we should approach it. We can play g4. g4 is of course, well, it just also eliminates the defender by taking. When f5 is gone, e4 becomes vulnerable. And if you try to defend it with g6, we can take it and we can conquer the open foul. Because black has difficulties to play the rook g8. If we take it, we take back, and the pawn on a6 is hanging. If you don't take it and you play something like rook b6, we can play rook g7, rook a7. Actually, black might be happy that he at least could still hold on. The pawn on a6 is still defended, his king is still not mated, but white can go back to g5, putting pressure, and black still has some difficulties. He maybe not immediately winning, but we can play still, well, progress with maybe the a pawn. We can bring it to g7, or we can at some point just say, well, let's go back. We go here and we switch with the rook to g3. So there are all kinds of options, and this is also important. The open file normally shouldn't win immediately. You can also just keep it as some positional strength, like in the position of Aronian, and from there on you can try to maneuver against all the weaknesses, and mostly when we have 3 weaknesses we can win the position. I won't show you all the examples now, and I'm delighted that we have an ebook later on. There you can play through all the exercises more slowly. There will be some more text, and yeah, you can get it after the show. So I want to go to this conquer the open file. As you can see now, it was pretty straightforward. White always had the open file, he was controlling it, and we had an easy game. But of course sometimes we have more difficulties to conquer it, and I want to have a small look with you what can be done to do this. So when we go to the first example, we see again we have this tension, which already we are very pleased with, and we have a nice outpost. So there are several ways how we can make use of it. As I mentioned, we can double rooks and release tension. We can make use of an outpost and get a protected pass pawn, for example. This is a good way to double rooks and conquer the open file. We can eliminate the defender by chasing or luring away. And we have a very interesting interposing idea also to conquer the open file. So as you can see, we have many ways to strengthen our position before opening, and especially this feeling for timing is very useful when we are playing with open files. In this position, when you would take and go for the outpost, this wouldn't be a good idea, because after taking rook g8, rook g1, king c7, yeah, you maybe even should be worried that the pawn on g6 can be lost at some point, because we can just come closer with the king, and maybe even with the rook come along and just pick up the g pawn. Of course, white can still try something on the queen side to get active very quickly, but it's clear that this is not the way how we want to proceed. Better is, and much easier is, rook g3. You simply double the rooks after you can take on f6, and rook g8 is hanging, so the rook should leave the g file. You can be happy to enter the position. Now again, black has difficulties to d6, b7 is hanging to b6. Then we can go with rook d7 and or first maybe better rook g6, and with the idea with rook d7, b4, and well, we have all kinds of ideas, and black almost has no moves. So this is actually a pleasant idea, and well, actually all other ideas, king to c8, we can play more or less the same ideas, rook c4, rook g6, king can go, maybe even some interesting way, try to entering the position, and again, black is in problem, has deep troubles. So this is one way, so we can double rooks before opening the position. The second one is interposing, and actually in some way it's maybe forbidden to show this game because it's shown almost in any book, but anyway, the example is so nice, so I decided to please you again with this move of Karpov's game in the Olympiad against Unziger. And this is one of the, actually I think one of the most famous, but I saw more examples, so it's not only in the game of Karpov where he was using this idea. He played bishop a7. The idea is very simple. Black first want to get firm control of the queen side, and after he will go to the king side, and then he can decide on which side he wants to win. The black pieces can't move at all. It's very poor position, and although the game went on much longer, this can be found in many books which describe the full fragment. I just want to show you the idea of how you can double rooks. So sometimes you can temporarily interpose a piece and then double rooks, and then after you can always release with bishop e3 back and taking advantage of your open file. Another nice idea which I want to show you is how we can make use of these of the outposts. We saw already in the first exercise that this is one important idea. And so when we go to the starting position, we have actually two ideas. We can take on f8 and we can play a6, and as usual we always have this difficulty how to make a choice between two of similar variations. We need to compare them. When we play immediately a6, it's also inconvenient because after g6 white even can play rook f6, and after taking on f6 you have a very pleasant choice how to take back. Probably e takes is even the best one, because then there comes a nice square for the knight on e5, and with protected pass pawn the win shouldn't be that difficult. A little bit more resistant would be rook f2, and that might be one of the reasons also why rook takes f8 in the starting position is better. When we take this rook, take back a6, that's the main idea. We will take on g7, knight f6, and promote our pawn. So black probably is wise to close the position with g6, knight f6, protecting a7, rook h8, and again here we have the position what to do, because the knight on f6 is locks the rook on h8 with the defending task protecting h7. We should find a way to make tension again, like I showed you in the previous example. So we have two options. We can go for b4, taking a5 and taking over the control of the b file, which is already quite tempting. I might like the idea with c4 a little bit more, taking on d5, rook c2, and later on we can still play for b4, and since the rook will remain out of the game, since it should defend a7, the game shouldn't be that difficult again to win. So we already have 3 nice ways to conquer the open file. We can interpose and double rooks. We can double rooks and then release tension. And the third one is that we can create an outpost, make use of it, and in this way everything looks very nice. So we go to the last form. It's eliminating the defender, and there are many ways, and also as you can see both rooks are fighting for the d file. The white rook on b1 is maybe a little bit putting some pressure on b7, but since there are no other pieces making use of b7, this isn't really something useful. In the endgame, white should be maybe even careful, because he has a double pawn, and if black plays c5, knight c6, black might be even better. Of course, you can still think about the outpost. We have the square on d6, so this is of course one of the ideas, but after knight f5 there's not much sense in playing this move. So we go back, bishop a5, attacking the defender of the d file, and as we can see, there's no resting place for the rook on the d file. He has no outpost where he can lean on, so he will take. And now important, don't take immediately back. This is also one of the habits which I always I'm happy to explain my pupils. Take your time when there's something taken or attacked. There are many options, and as now as you can see also now, bishop b6, intermediate check worsens black position dramatically, because if we take now, we see that the bishop locks the black king, and even if we play c5, rook d7, it's clear that black is in trouble. He can still play knight f5. We shouldn't be greedy now taking immediately on f7, but we can simply play something like king f3, after you can play h3, g4, slowly moving forward, and white is simply winning. So we see that we have 4 ways of conquering the open file. We come now to the last kind of chapter which I wish to explain. Is we saw already how to make use of the open file with 8 and 7 rank tactically and positionally. We saw already that it's important to make this tension to open it, and also we saw that there are 4 ways of conquering the open file and how to make use of them. But we're still a little bit with this moment of timing, especially when there's choice. It's always a little bit complicated when to open and where to open the position, and that's what I want to discuss in the next positions. As we already, by the way, could have seen in the position with g4 in one of the previous exercises. Let me see where I can find it. I'm a little bit scrolling through the list to find it, because it's I should scroll through. No, this is not. I should scroll through more. The game of Botwinic. This is also a nice example. This is just somehow I can't find it. So we go back. We go back and we will go to the defending exercise. The open the position. It will remain for your ebook, which you will get after the show, and you can look through this example. The idea is the same as in the position which I already showed you, is that when there are 2 places, think about when to open it, because if you do it too quickly, your opponent will get away with it, and maybe even will conquer the open file. and if you do it too late, then you might miss your opportunity to win it. So in this position we see that there are two rooks on the e-file of white. White doubled his rooks already, and so he should be happy. He has even an outpost on e6, while his opponent has an outpost on e5 but can't use it because of the bishop on g3. So actually black might be in big trouble. But we have actually a very nice move in this way to defend our position. We will play bishop d4, check, c3, and now comes the interesting question: should we exchange one pair of rooks or not? Well, in general, it depends on how you estimate your position. When you're better, usually you want to exchange one pair of rooks simply because there's one attacking object more. One rook is usually undefended and two rooks defend each other. There's another way to think about it, why you want to exchange one rook and not, for example, two, is because the other rook can usually be very good to attack or useful to attack weaknesses in the white position. And so therefore you prefer to keep one on the board. And in this position also we don't have a function for the rook on e8, so better just to take it. And now comes the most important move because of defending, is bishop e5. We block the e-file, which is not useful. And again, what is black aiming for? If you had some thoughts about it, then we can see that h5 is actually the main threat of black. Black wants to activate his rook. Again, we will make the tension, and already black has a very convenient position. If white takes on e5, we will get a nice protected pass pawn. Of course, white also has this pawn on d5, but black more easily can just block it and still has his chances with h5. So I think anyway the black's chances should be preferable. What we have seen is that when it comes to all this kind of positions, we actually you can look in which phase you are. Are you in the phase of making tension? Are you in the phase of opening up? Then you always should keep in mind which options we had, which you still the 4 ways to conquer the open file. Are there ways to double the rooks, of course, and especially also where to open the open file. When we come back and we still have time for one nice example, I wanted to show you a combination between the 7th rank and a king's attack, because that is actually very important, that you have more or less 2 ways to make use of it. And one of them is the game which came from here. And that's, let me see, this one. It's a classic game, and the nice thing, we can learn a lot about old games. We see that black has a very active position. White's king is already on f1. You have the open file with your black rook on e8, but somehow it's maybe not so easy to defend. Black bishop is hanging, h7 might be hanging, and after bishop e3 and maybe some more defending moves, white position is maybe not that much worse because simply you have a strong center. So we are a little bit in a hurry, and black found a very nice and pleasant way to improve it. He played queen takes f3. Remarkable move. He simply sacrificed his queen to bring the white king into trouble. Of course, if we take with the pawn on f3, that's not a good idea, because it will simply walk into the mating net on f1. So of course the queen can't be taken, but of course we can take back the bishop, and now the queen is hanging, c7 is hanging, h7 is hanging, and again white can try to finish his development, maybe even play with pair bishop. So That's all yeah, interesting. And now, of course, black has an yeah, needs to choose, and he chose again for an incredible move. Instead of defending and removing his queen, he developed with knight c6. um, I don't know if you saw this game, but Wai lately played a wonderful attacking game, which already is even nicely commended by Jan, by the way, in Chess24. So if you haven't seen it, definitely you should see it, because it's a great watch about the game, and also excellent commentaries of Jan. So knight c6 was played, again with the same idea that if we take, it's still mate, so we can't. So white played bishop b2. Unfortunately, bishop e3 to give the king a little bit more space and safety doesn't work, because we are still in a pin. But on the other hand, the queen is hanging now, so that might yeah, that will become an interesting variation. Let me have a look at it. So if we take here, we take an f3, bishop's kiss check, and then of course we might want to take on d4, threatening mate on f3 and threatening the queen, but probably we can simply take on e3, and that's not working. So unfortunately, no prizes for this move. So bishop e3 can't be followed by queen takes f3. But there's another attacking idea which I always like very much, is simply the move bishop h3. You simply pin the pawn, and of course if we take, then we can take on e3, and now all the threats are remaining with difficulties for white. So we go back, bishop b2, knight takes b4. Again, black doesn't want to remove his queen. White takes the pawn. Not so much about the pawn, it's just the bishop is hanging, so he wants to protect it, and he took the pawn, and now he took the queen. The back rank is defended, and of course after taking, he gains back, or his bishop is in safety again. And this is interesting, because we see that we are now a full bishop down, even a pair of bishop. And what we got is actually only a bad king on g1. And again, as we will see, the rook will come to e2. And the rook on e2 is at least worth a pawn, so at least we have some compensation, but of course there are much more ideas. We have the rook coming to e8, mating on e1, and the white king is just mated. And of course there are two bishops hanging, so there's big compensation for the piece. Rook c1, rook a e8, bishop c3, defending e1, because there was a mating net. And now there are actually two ways. Probably the most smooth way would have been rook takes c2, giving another exchange, but the rook goes to e6. And this is another idea. We already have seen that the back rank was a nice option to win tactically. We have already seen that the 7th rank can be very strong. But of course also the 3rd or 4th rank can be used as a rook lift with mating ideas against the king. Well, just to show you one way of move, rook g6, and the mating net is closed. In the game he tried a little bit in a different way. He played rook e3, bishop b4, rook takes f4, 3, threatening also to take on f2, and after bishop d1 he decided the game lasted long enough, so he played endlessly. He played rook f6, threatening making a mating threat with rook g6, and the game was made. So I want to thank you for your attention, because we are at the end of the show for today. I hope you got some more clear idea about the use of the open file and the ways how we can apply it and make use of it. I I hope you will like the ebook, and of course you will be back to us in the next trainings or other shows. Thank you very much for your attention, and see you next time.